You think a badge makes you a god? You think silence means weakness? In this town, Officer Clint Rockwell thought he could do whatever he wanted. He thought pouring, scalding hot coffee on a 64-year-old grandmother was just another Tuesday. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't check the last name on her ID. He didn't know that the woman wiping coffee off her face wasn't just a victim. She was the mother of the man who signs his paychecks, and the man who was about to sign his arrest warrant. This is the story of how one cup of coffee cost a racist cop his entire life. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind that bites at your exposed skin with a damp, clinging chill. In the sleepy town of Eastwood, Louisiana, the locals congregated at the Gilded Fork, a diner that smelled perpetually of bacon grease and stale cigarette smoke from the parking lot. Beatrice Washington sat in booth 4, just as she had every Tuesday for the last 15 years. At 64, Beatrice, or Ms. B, as the kinder waitresses called her, was a study in quiet dignity. She wore her Sunday best even on weekdays, a pressed floral blouse buttoned to the neck, and a grey wool cardigan that had seen better decades. She was a small woman, shrinking slightly with age, her hair pulled back into a tight salt and pepper bun. To the casual observer, she was nobody. Just another elderly black woman, taking up space, sipping the cheapest tea on the menu, and reading a thick paperback book with a cracked spine. She kept her head down. That was the rule of survival she had learned growing up in the deep South during harder times, and it was a habit she hadn't shaken even in 2024. "More hot water, Ms. B?" asked Jenny, a young waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that hung crookedly. "No, thank you, child," Beatrice whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "I'm just fine." She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was simply existing, enjoying the 1 hour of silence she allowed herself before heading to the community center where she volunteered. She turned the page of her book, a legal thriller. She loved reading about justice. It was a nice fantasy. The bell above the diner door jingled violently, slamming against the glass. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The low hum of conversation died out, replaced by the clatter of silverware on porcelain. Officer Clint Rockwell walked in. Clint was a wall of a man, though mostly soft in the middle these days. He was a 20-year veteran of the Eastwood Police Department, a man whose neck spilled over his collar and whose face was perpetually flushed a deep, angry red. He didn't walk. He patrolled. Even when he was off duty or on a lunch break, he moved like he owned the floorboards beneath his boots. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowed behind aviator sunglasses, even though it was overcast outside. He was looking for a target. Clint was a man who fed on small acts of dominance. A parking ticket here, a rough frisk there, a sneer at a teenager walking too slowly. Today he was in a foul mood. His alimony payment had just cleared, leaving his bank account dangerously low, and the captain had chewed him out earlier for excessive force on a jaywalker. He needed to feel big again. He marched toward the window seats. His usual spot was booth 4, but booth 4 was taken. Beatrice didn't look up. She was engrossed in her chapter, unaware that a shadow had just fallen over her table. Clint stopped right at the edge of the table. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, waiting for her to acknowledge him. When she didn't, his jaw tightened. The disrespect, the sheer audacity of this woman to ignore him. "You're in my seat," Clint grunted, his voice a gravelly bass that carried across the silent diner. Beatrice paused. She carefully marked her page with a small ribbon and looked up. Her eyes were brown, soft, and tired. She blinked, adjusting her glasses. "Excuse me, officer." I said, Clint leaned down, placing two heavy, calloused hands on the table, leaning into her personal space. "You are in my seat. I sit here. Everyone knows I sit here." Beatrice looked around. The diner was half empty. There were 3 other booths open by the window, and 2 large tables near the back. I didn't know this was reserved, sir," she said softly. "I've been sitting here every Tuesday for years." "Well, today is different," Clint snapped. "Move." It wasn't a request. It was an order barked at a subordinate. Beatrice hesitated. She looked at her tea, her book, her purse. "Officer, I'm almost finished. There are plenty of other seats. I don't want other seats. I want this one." Clint's voice rose. He wanted a scene. He wanted her to scramble. He wanted to see that fear in her eyes that he used to see back in the 80s. The fear that acknowledged he was the predator and she was the prey. But Beatrice didn't scramble. She took a deep breath, clutching her cardigan tighter. "I will move when I finish my tea, officer. Please leave me be." The diner went dead silent. Jenny, the waitress, froze behind the counter, holding a coffee pot mid-air. Nobody spoke to Clint Rockwell like that. Clint's face turned a shade of purple. His authority, his badge, his fragile ego, it was all being challenged by a grandmother in a floral blouse. "You listen to me," Clint hissed, reaching for his belt, resting his hand near his taser, a habit, a threat. "You don't tell me what you'll do. You get up, you get your trash, and you get out of my face." Beatrice looked him dead in the eye. For a quiet woman, she had a gaze of steel. "I am not breaking any laws, officer. I am a paying customer." That was the breaking point. Clint Rockwell didn't think. He reacted. He was a man driven by impulse and rage, a man who had never truly been held accountable for his cruelty, because the badge always protected him. He looked at the ceramic mug in his hand. He had grabbed a fresh cup of coffee from the counter on his way in. It was steaming hot, freshly brewed, dark and scalding. "Paying customer," Clint laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You think your $2 tea buys you rights here?" He took the lid off his coffee. "Officer, please," Jenny called out from the counter, her voice trembling. "I can get you a table in the back." "Shut up, Jenny," Clint roared without looking back. He looked down at Beatrice. She hadn't moved. She hadn't flinched. That stoicism infuriated him more than insults would have. "You need to wake up," Clint sneered. "You look a little sleepy, Grandma." With a casual, deliberate motion, Clint tilted his wrist. He didn't throw it. That would have been assault in the heat of passion. No, this was worse. He poured it. He tipped the cup over her head, letting the dark, boiling liquid cascade down. It hit her hair first, then it ran down her forehead, over her glasses, searing into her cheeks, soaking into the wool of her cardigan. The sound of the liquid hitting the table and the floor was the only noise in the room. Drip, drip, splash. Beatrice gasped, a sharp intake of breath as the heat shocked her skin. She shut her eyes tight as the coffee burned her eyelids. She didn't scream, she didn't wail, she just sat there, shaking violently as the steam rose off her soaked clothes. "Whoops," Clint said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Slipped, my bad." He crushed the empty paper cup in his hand and tossed it onto her open book, staining the pages brown. "Now, you look like a mess," Clint whispered, leaning in close to her ear. "Get the hell out of here before I arrest you for public disturbance and loitering." Beatrice sat frozen for a moment longer. The pain was sharp, throbbing across her scalp and neck. She reached up with a trembling hand and took off her fogged, coffee-stained glasses. She grabbed a napkin and wiped her eyes. Slowly, painfully, she stood up. She didn't look at Clint. She didn't curse him. She picked up her purse. She picked up her ruined book. She placed a $5 bill on the table, wet with coffee, to cover her tea and a tip for Jenny. She turned and walked toward the door. She walked with a limp now, her dignity battered but her spine straight. "That's right! Run along!" Clint shouted after her, sitting down in the booth she had just vacated. He looked around the diner, daring anyone to say something. "What are you all looking at? Eat your food." The patrons looked down. They were cowards. They saw injustice, but they also saw the gun on Clint's hip and the badge on his chest. They knew Clint had friends in high places. They knew fighting him meant traffic tickets, random searches, and hell for their families. So they ate their eggs in silence. Clint smirked, wiping a drop of coffee off the table with his sleeve. He felt good. He felt powerful. He had reclaimed his territory. Outside, in the grey parking lot, Beatrice Washington made it to her old 2010 Honda Civic before her legs gave out. She leaned against the car door, sobbing quietly, her skin burning. She opened her phone. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hit the buttons. She didn't call 911. What was the point? Clint was the law. Instead, she dialed a number she rarely used. She hated bothering him. He was a busy man. A very important man. He lived in D.C. now, a world away from Eastwood. The phone rang twice. "Hey, Mama." The voice on the other end was deep, warm, and sounded like safety. "Everything okay? You don't usually call this time of day." Beatrice took a shuddering breath, trying to steady her voice. "Dante," she whispered. "Mama." The warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by instant alertness. "What's wrong? You're crying." I had an accident at the diner," she lied, trying to minimize it. "With an officer." "An accident? Are you hurt?" "He poured coffee on me, Dante. He poured boiling coffee on my head. He told me to move, and I didn't move fast enough." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a gathering storm. It was the silence of a tectonic plate shifting before an earthquake. "Who?" Dante asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Officer Rockwell. Clint Rockwell. Did he arrest you?" "No, he just humiliated me." Everyone watched, Dante. Everyone watched. "Mama," Dante said, and Beatrice could hear the sound of a chair scraping back, footsteps, the sound of a door slamming. "Listen to me. Go home. Put aloe on the burns. Do not wash that cardigan. Do not throw away that book. I'm coming." "Baby, you're in Washington. You have work." "My work is done," Dante said. "I'm taking a leave of absence. I'll be there in 6 hours. And Mama?" "Yes?" "Clint Rockwell just made the last mistake of his career. I promise you that." Beatrice hung up. She didn't know exactly what her son was doing these days. She knew he was a lawyer, high up in the federal government. She knew he had been appointed by the president for something important last year. She just called him Judge, sometimes as a joke. She didn't realize that in the legal world, her son was known as the Hammer. She didn't realize that Dante Washington wasn't just a lawyer. He was the newly appointed United States Attorney for the Eastern District, the top federal prosecutor for the region. He was the man who prosecuted police corruption for a living. And he was coming home. The flight from D.C. to New Orleans was a blur of grey clouds and turbulence, mirroring the storm brewing inside Dante Washington's chest. He rented a black Suburban at the airport, an imposing government-style vehicle that suited his mood, and made the 2-hour drive north to Eastwood. Eastwood hadn't changed. It was stuck in a time loop of fading brick storefronts, peeling paint, and the oppressive humidity that clung to the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oaks. As Dante drove down Main Street, he saw the landmarks of his youth, the library where he'd hidden from bullies, the barber shop where the old men talked politics, and the Gilded Fork, the scene of the crime. He didn't stop there yet. He drove straight to the small, white-clapboard house at the end of Elm Street. When he walked through the front door, the smell hit him, lavender and old paper, the scent of his childhood. But there was a new smell today, the sharp, medicinal tang of burn ointment. Beatrice was sitting in her recliner, a wet towel draped over her shoulder. The side of her face was red and blistered. Her eye was swollen shut. The coffee had missed her eye by a fraction of an inch, but the eyelid was angry and raw. "Dante," she breathed, trying to stand up. "Sit down, Mama," he said, his voice cracking. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside her. He was a large man, 6'3" in his tailored suit. But in this house, he was still just her boy. He gently lifted the towel. The burns were 2nd degree, angry, peeling. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. He had prosecuted terrorists, drug kingpins, and corrupt senators. He had seen crime scene photos that would make a Marine vomit. But seeing this, seeing the woman who had scrubbed floors to put him through law school, treated like trash, broke something inside him. "Did you go to the hospital?" he asked. "I didn't want to make a fuss," she whispered. "We are making a fuss," Dante said, standing up. "I'm taking you to the urgent care in the next county over. I want everything documented. Photos, medical reports, time stamps, everything." "Dante, please," she said, clutching his hand. "Rockwell, he runs this town. If you go after him, he'll hurt you. He'll plant drugs in your car. He'll find a reason." Dante smiled, but it was a cold, terrifying expression. "Let him try, Mama. He's playing checkers. I'm playing chess. And I've got the whole board rigged." After getting his mother treated and settled back home with pain medication, Dante changed out of his suit. He put on a pair of unassuming jeans and a plain grey hoodie. He needed to be underestimated. He drove to the Gilded Fork. It was 4 p.m. The diner was quiet. Jenny, the waitress, was wiping down the counter, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as the bell jingled, fear flashing across her face. Dante sat at the counter. "Coffee, please. Black." Jenny poured it, her hand shaking slightly. You're not from around here." "I grew up here," Dante said, taking a sip, "but I've been gone a long time." He looked at her. "I'm Beatrice Washington's son." Jenny dropped the rag. She looked toward the kitchen, then back at Dante. "Oh God, is she okay? I wanted to help her, I swear. But Clint, Officer Rockwell, he's crazy. He's been on a tear lately." "I know you were scared," Dante said, his voice low and soothing. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to ask a favor." "I can't testify," she whispered frantically. "He knows where I live. He knows my kid's school. I don't need you to testify yet. I need the tapes." Dante pointed to the camera dome in the corner of the ceiling. "Does that work?" Jenny bit her lip. "The boss, Mr. Henderson. He usually tapes over them every 48 hours to save money on storage." "Is Mr. Henderson here?" "He's in the back office." Dante nodded. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. It wasn't his flashy Department of Justice card. It was a simple card that just said, "Dante Washington, attorney at law. Tell Mr. Henderson I'd like to buy the hard drive for this week's footage. Tell him I'll pay $500 cash, right now. No questions asked. And tell him if the footage is accidentally deleted, the next person walking through that door won't be a lawyer offering cash. It will be a federal agent with a subpoena for his tax records." Jenny's eyes went wide. She snatched the card and ran to the back. 5 minutes later, a sweating, balding man in a grease-stained apron came out. He didn't look at Dante. He just slid a small black external hard drive across the counter. "Take it," Henderson grunted. "I don't want no trouble with the feds. Just take it and go." Dante placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the counter. "Smart choice, Mr. Henderson. You just bought yourself immunity." Dante walked out with the hard drive in his pocket. He had the weapon. Now he needed the confession. The next morning, Dante dressed carefully. He didn't wear his expensive Italian suit. He wore a pair of khakis and a button-down shirt that looked slightly too large, giving him the appearance of a schlumpy, defeated man. He put on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses he hadn't worn in years. He needed Rockwell to see a victim, not a predator. He walked into the Eastwood Police Department precinct. It was a small building, smelling of stale coffee and bureaucracy. The front desk sergeant, a man named Miller, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Help you?" "Yes, sir," Dante said, forcing a stutter into his voice. I'm here to file a complaint about an incident yesterday." Miller sighed, putting down his pen. "Name?" "Dante Washington." Miller paused. "Washington? You kin to the old lady at the diner?" "She's my mother." Miller smirked. He picked up the phone. "Rockwell, get out here. You got a fan club." A moment later, Clint Rockwell kicked open the door from the back offices. He looked even bigger in the small hallway, his thumbs hooked into his duty belt. He looked Dante up and down, sneering at the weak man before him. "You the son?" Rockwell asked, chewing on a toothpick. "Yes, sir," Dante said, looking at the floor. "My mother. She has burns, officer. She's in a lot of pain. I just wanted to come by and see if we could get an apology. Maybe some help with the medical bills?" Rockwell laughed. It was a loud, barking sound. He looked at Miller, and they shared a look of amusement. "An apology?" Rockwell stepped closer, invading Dante's personal space, using the same intimidation tactic he had used on Beatrice. "Let me explain something to you, boy. Your mama was loitering. She was disturbing the peace. I did her a favor by not arresting her. The coffee? That was an accident. Clumsy hands." "It didn't look like an accident," Dante said softly. "People said you poured it." "People say a lot of things," Rockwell hissed, leaning in so close Dante could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "But around here, I decide what happened. I write the reports. And in my report, she assaulted me with hot liquid. I just haven't filed charges yet because I'm a nice guy." Rockwell poked a stiff finger into Dante's chest. "So here is what's going to happen. You're going to turn around. You're going to walk out that door. And you're going to thank me for not throwing your mama in a cell for assaulting a police officer. Do we have an understanding?" Dante swallowed hard. He adjusted his glasses. "So, you're saying you won't pay for the medical bills, even though you poured it on purpose?" "I'm saying," Rockwell grinned, "that if you don't get out of my face, you're going to trip and fall down those stairs outside. And that will be an accident, too." "I see," Dante said. He took a deep breath, and his posture changed. He straightened his spine. The slump vanished. The stutter disappeared. He looked Rockwell directly in the eyes, his gaze suddenly sharp and predatory. "Thank you, officer. That clarifies everything." "What?" Rockwell blinked, confused by the sudden shift in demeanor. Dante tapped the breast pocket of his shirt. A small, rectangular outline was visible there. "Louisiana is a one-party consent state for audio recordings," Dante said, his voice booming with the authority of a courtroom prosecutor. "Which means I didn't need your permission to record this conversation. I have you on tape admitting to falsifying a police report, threatening a civilian, and conspiracy to commit assault." Rockwell's face went red. He reached for his belt. "Give me that phone." "I wouldn't do that," Dante said calmly, "because right now, this feed is being live-streamed to a cloud server secured by the Department of Justice." Department of... What? Rockwell froze. Dante reached into his back pocket and pulled out his leather badge holder. He flipped it open. The gold shield of the United States Department of Justice gleamed under the fluorescent lights. My name is Dante Washington. I am the United States Attorney for the Eastern District. And Officer Rockwell, you are officially the subject of a federal civil rights investigation. The silence in the precinct was absolute. Miller dropped his pen. Rockwell's mouth hung open, the toothpick falling to the floor. You're a Fed? Rockwell stammered. I'm not just a Fed. Dante smiled coldly. I'm the man who is going to burn your world down. Have a nice day, gentlemen. Dante turned and walked out. This time, nobody stopped him. Dante didn't go back to D.C. He set up a command center in the living room of his mother's house. He knew that one recording and one video weren't enough. In the American legal system, police unions were powerful. Qualified immunity was a high wall to climb. To truly bury Rockwell, Dante needed to prove a pattern of behavior. He needed to prove that the Eastwood Police Department was systematically corrupt and that Rockwell was the ringleader. He called in his team. Within 24 hours, 3 black SUVs rolled into Eastwood. They weren't police cars. They were unmarked federal vehicles. Dante's team consisted of 2 FBI agents he had worked with on RICO cases, Agent Sarah Miller and Agent David Chen, and a forensic accountant named Marcus. What are we looking for, boss? Sarah asked, setting up her laptop on Beatrice's dining table. Everything, Dante said. Rockwell has been a cop here for 20 years on a salary of $55,000. Look at his assets. Look at his arrests. Look at the racial breakdown of his traffic stops. I want to know who he arrests, who he lets go, and how much money he has in the bank. Beatrice watched from the kitchen, making tea for the agents. She was still in pain, but there was a light in her eyes now. She watched her son command these serious people with effortless authority, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. By Thursday evening, the picture began to clear, and it was uglier than Dante imagined. Boss, you need to see this, Marcus said, pulling up a spreadsheet. Rockwell owns 3 rental properties in the county, all paid for in cash. He also has a boat docked at the marina. On a cop's salary? Dante asked. Impossible, Marcus said. But look at the dates of the purchases. They always line up with big drug busts where evidence went missing, or traffic stops involving out-of-towners carrying cash. Civil asset forfeiture abuse, Dante muttered. He's stealing cash from suspects and pocketing it. It gets worse, Sarah added. I pulled his dashcam logs. There are huge gaps. Every time he has a use of force incident, his camera conveniently malfunctions. But here's the kicker. I found a forum post from 3 years ago. A tourist from Texas claimed an Eastwood cop planted a baggie of meth in his car and demanded $2,000 cash to let him go. Did he pay? He paid, and the description of the cop matches Rockwell. Dante paced the room. He's not just a racist bully. He's running a shakedown racket. He's a gangster with a badge. We have enough for an indictment on wire fraud and deprivation of rights, David said. Do we move in? No, Dante said, staring at the photo of Rockwell pinned to the corkboard they had set up. Not yet. If we arrest him now, the chief will claim Rockwell is a bad apple and throw him under the bus to save the department. I want the chief. I want the whole damn tree. So what do we do? Dante turned to his mother. Mama, do you trust me? With my life, baby, she said. I need you to do something brave. I need you to go back to the diner. The room went silent. Why? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because Rockwell is arrogant, Dante said. He knows I'm a Fed now, so he's scared. But he's also stupid. He thinks I'm bound by red tape. He thinks he can intimidate you into dropping the complaint before I can build a case. He's going to come to you, and when he does, I want him to incriminate the chief." "He'll hurt her," Sarah protested. "No," Dante said, "because this time the entire diner will be wired, and half the customers will be undercover FBI agents." Dante knelt before his mother again. "You don't have to do this. We have enough to get him fired. But if you want to make sure he never wears a badge again, and that Chief Miller never covers up for another dirty cop, we need this." Beatrice looked at her burns in the mirror. She remembered the heat of the coffee. She remembered the humiliation. She remembered the silence of the other customers. She straightened her back. "Get me my Sunday dress," she said. "I'm going to get some tea." The following Tuesday, Eastwood felt heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The sky was an ominous slate grey, threatening a storm that hadn't yet broken. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, Beatrice Washington walked into the Gilded Fork. She was dressed impeccably in a royal blue Sunday suit, a wide-brimmed hat perched on her head to cover the healing burns on her scalp. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane she didn't fully need, but her head was held high. The bandage on her face was gone, revealing the angry red skin that was still healing, a badge of her survival. The diner was busier than usual for a Tuesday morning. In booth, one sat a young couple arguing quietly over a road map, Agent Sarah Miller and Agent David Chen in plain clothes. At the counter, a man in a greasy trucker hat was nursing a black coffee. Marcus, the forensic accountant. Two contractors in dirty overalls ate pancakes near the door. Beatrice walked straight to booth 4. She sat down. She placed a new paperback book on the table. She ordered a tea. She waited. Dante was parked in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, disguised as a telephone repair truck. He watched the live feed from the high-definition button camera pinned to his mother's blouse. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run in there and shield her, to pull her out of the line of fire, but he forced himself to watch the monitor. "He's coming!" Sarah's voice crackled over the earpiece. Black Cruiser just pulled into the lot. The bell above the door jingled. Clint Rockwell entered the diner. He looked worse for wear. His eyes were baggy, his uniform shirt was slightly untucked, and he had a nervous tick in his jaw. He had spent the last week in a panic, calling favors, shredding documents, and getting yelled at by Chief Miller for the federal rumors circulating. He was a cornered animal, and that made him dangerous. He scanned the room. When his eyes landed on Beatrice sitting in booth 4, his face contorted into a mask of disbelief and rage. He didn't just walk over. He stormed. "You got a lot of nerve," Rockwell hissed, not bothering with pleasantries. He stood over her, casting a long shadow, blocking the light from the window. "After what your boy pulled, you think you can just waltz back in here?" Beatrice took a sip of her tea. Her hand didn't shake. "This is a public establishment, officer. I have every right to be here." "Your son is making a big mistake." Rockwell leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that the button mic picked up with crystal clarity. "He thinks he's big time because he's got a fancy title. He's in my town now. Accidents happen in Eastwood, Miss Spee. Cars run off the road. Electrical fires start in old wooden houses at night." Dante, in the van, clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. "That's a threat against a federal witness," he muttered into his headset. "Got him. Keep talking, you idiot." "Is that a threat, officer?" Beatrice asked calmly, looking him in the eye. "It's a promise," Rockwell sneered. "Now here's the deal. You're going to call your boy. You're going to tell him you made it all up. You're going to tell him you're senile and you tripped. And if you do that, Maybe I forget to tell the boys to pay a visit to your house tonight." Beatrice looked at him with profound pity. "You really are a small man, aren't you?" Rockwell's face flushed purple. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the teacup, spilling the liquid. "Do you hear me? The chief and I run this town. We bury people like you. We've been doing it for 20 years. You think one lawyer is going to stop?" Crash! The front door of the diner burst open. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The shout was deafening. The contractors by the door drew weapons. The couple in booth 1 leaped up, badges flashing on chains around their necks. Rockwell spun around, reaching instinctively for his sidearm, but he froze when he found himself staring down the barrel of 3 Glock 19s. "Hands! Show me your hands!" Agent Sarah Miller shouted, her weapon trained on Rockwell's chest. Rockwell froze. His eyes darted around the room. The tourist couple, the trucker, even the cook. Everyone had a weapon trained on him. The diner had become a kill box. Then the door opened again. Dante walked in. He was wearing his suit now, the full armor of his office. He walked slowly, the sound of his dress shoes clicking on the tile floor, the only sound in the room. He stopped 3 feet from the man who had tormented his mother. "Officer Clint Rockwell," Dante said, his voice ringing through the silent diner with the weight of judgment. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, racketeering, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and threatening a federal witness." Rockwell looked at Dante, then at Beatrice. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and sickly. You trapped me." "No," Dante said, leaning in close, his eyes cold. "You trapped yourself the moment you poured that coffee. You just didn't know the bill was coming due." He turned to the agents. "Cuff him." As they slammed Rockwell against the counter and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, Dante walked over to booth 4. He offered a hand to his mother. "You okay, Mama?" Beatrice took his hand and stood up. She looked at the empty seat where Rockwell had sat, then at the man being dragged out the door, screaming obscenities. "I am now," she said softly. "I am now." The fallout from the arrest at the Gilded Fork was not a ripple. It was a tidal wave that crashed over Eastwood, drowning the old order in a flood of subpoenas, indictments, and public scrutiny. In the immediate aftermath, the silence that had plagued the town for decades was shattered. The sight of Officer Clint Rockwell, the untouchable titan of Main Street, being dragged out of the diner in handcuffs, screaming obscenities while federal agents secured the perimeter, broke the spell of fear that had held the community hostage. Within hours, videos from cell phones, hidden under tables during the raid, hit social media. By evening, the hashtag Eastwood Justice was trending nationally. But viral fame was just the spark. Dante Washington was here to build the fire. Dante didn't return to D.C. immediately. He set up a temporary field office in the federal courthouse in the neighboring district, knowing that the Eastwood municipal buildings were compromised. He knew that arresting Rockwell was the easy part. Keeping him in jail and dismantling the corrupt infrastructure that created him would be the war. The first week was a masterclass in legal pressure. Rockwell's defense attorney, a local crony named Barry Sheckler, who played golf with the chief on Sundays, attempted to get Rockwell released on bail. He argued that Rockwell was a decorated veteran of the force, a pillar of the community, and not a flight risk. Dante appeared in court personally for the bail hearing. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand, he simply walked to the podium and laid a thick binder on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Dante said, his voice echoing in the packed courtroom. "The defense claims Mr. Rockwell is a pillar of the community. The United States government has evidence that this pillar is actually a foundation of rot. We have bank records showing $300,000 in unexplained cash deposits. We have sworn affidavits from 18 different citizens detailing intimidation, theft, and assault. And we have a recording of Mr. Rockwell threatening to burn down the home of a federal witness, my mother. If he walks out of this courtroom today, there isn't a soul in Eastwood who is safe. The judge, a stern woman from New Orleans who had no patience for small-town corruption, denied bail. Rockwell was remanded to federal custody. As the bailiffs led him away, he looked back at the gallery. He scanned the faces, looking for support, looking for the boys from the precinct who always had his back. He found none. The rows behind him were empty of uniforms. The other officers had seen the federal indictment. They had seen the FBI vans circling the station. They were terrified. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked, it had evaporated. Rockwell was alone. The turning point came 10 days later. Confined to a holding cell in a federal detention center, stripped of his badge, his gun, and his uniform, Rockwell began to unravel. He was no longer the predator. He was just inmate 49201. The reality of his situation set in when Dante sent him a proffer agreement, a deal. Dante sat across from Rockwell in the interrogation room. The glass was thick, the air stale. Rockwell looked smaller. The bluster was gone, replaced by a twitchy, desperate energy. "Here's the reality, Clint," Dante said, sliding a document across the metal table. "I have you on 5 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of deprivation of rights, and 1 count of witness tampering. The sentencing guidelines for just the witness tampering, threatening my mother, carry a mandatory minimum of 10 years. Stack the rest, and you're looking at 40 years. You're 45 years old. You will die in prison." Rockwell swallowed hard. "I was following orders," he croaked. "The chief, he told us to keep the streets clean. He told us to tax the drug dealers." "I know," Dante said, leaning back. "And that's why I'm here. I don't just want you. I want the architect. You give me Chief Miller. You give me the mayor who looked the other way. You give me the judges who signed the fake warrants. You testify on the record to everything. If you do that, I'll recommend a sentence of 15 years instead of 40. Rockwell looked at the paper. He thought about loyalty. Then he thought about dying in a concrete box. He picked up the pen. "I can give you the ledger," Rockwell whispered. "Miller keeps a ledger in a safe under the floorboards of his hunting cabin. It has every bribe, every payoff for the last 12 years. The dominoes fell with terrifying speed. Based on Rockwell's confession, the FBI raided Chief Miller's cabin. They found the ledger. It was a road map of corruption that implicated not just the police department, but the entire town council. The investigation expanded. The mayor resigned in disgrace before he could be arrested. 2 local judges were impeached and indicted. The Eastwood Police Department was effectively dissolved and placed under federal oversight. The state police took over patrols while a new, vetted force was hired from the ground up. But for Beatrice Washington, the legal victory was secondary. The real change was happening in the streets. For years, Beatrice had walked with her head down. She had taught her son to keep his head down. It was a survival mechanism etched into her DNA by generations of trauma. But as the trials proceeded, something shifted in her spirit. She stopped shrinking. It started small. She began walking to the grocery store without clutching her purse to her chest. She started looking people in the eye, really looking at them. When she walked past a patrol car, now driven by a polite state trooper, she didn't flinch. She waved. And they waved back. The settlement offer from the city came 6 months later. To avoid a protracted civil rights lawsuit that would bankrupt the municipality, the interim city council offered a settlement of $2.5 million. It was an astronomical sum for a woman who had clipped coupons her entire life. Dante brought the paperwork to her house. "You don't have to sign this, Mama. We can go to trial. We can get more." "No," Beatrice said, looking at the number. "This is enough. It's not about the money. It's about the admission. They are admitting they were wrong." She signed the papers. But Beatrice didn't buy a mansion in the hills. She didn't move to Florida to retire. She did something that confused the neighbors and terrified the local business owners who had been complicit in the old system. She went back to the Gilded Fork. The diner had suffered during the investigation. Mr. Henderson, the owner who had erased tapes and turned a blind eye to Rockwell's bullying, was facing obstruction charges. The diner was shuttered, a for sale sign gathering dust in the window. Beatrice called the realtor. She bought the building in cash. Renovations began immediately. Beatrice was there every day, wearing a hard hat over her Sunday bun, directing the contractors. She didn't want it to look like the old place. She wanted the grease and the smoke and the bad memories scrubbed out of the walls. She had the dark, dingy paneling torn down and replaced with bright, warm yellow paint. She installed big bay windows to let the light flood in. She fired the old staff, the ones who had laughed when Rockwell bullied customers. But she found Jenny, the young waitress who had tried to warn her, who had risked her job to help Dante get the tapes. Jenny was working at a gas station, struggling to make ends meet. Beatrice drove to the gas station. She walked up to the counter. "Ms. B?" Jenny gasped. "I heard you got rich. What are you doing here?" "I'm here to offer you a job," Beatrice said. "I bought the diner. I need a manager, someone who knows what it means to serve people with kindness. I'll pay you double what you made before, and I'll cover your tuition if you want to go back to school." Jenny burst into tears. She came around the counter and hugged Beatrice, sobbing into her shoulder. When the diner reopened, Beatrice renamed it. The sign out front, hand-painted in elegant gold letters, read, "The Gavel." It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a sanctuary. The menu featured Beatrice's own recipes, collard greens, smothered pork chops, and her famous sweet potato pie. But the atmosphere was the real draw. It was a place where everyone was treated with ferocious respect. On the back wall, Beatrice commissioned a mural. It wasn't a picture of herself. It was a painting of Lady Justice, blindfolded, holding the scales. But instead of a sword, Lady Justice was holding a steaming cup of coffee. The grand opening was the event of the year. Dante flew down, bringing his colleagues from the DOJ. The new mayor attended. Even the new police chief stopped by to shake Beatrice's hand. But the most poignant moment came a year later, on a rainy Tuesday in November. The lunch rush had just died down. Beatrice was sitting in booth 4, her booth. It had been reupholstered in velvet, and a small brass plaque on the wall read, "The Seat of Justice." She was reading a new legal thriller, sipping her tea, enjoying the hum of conversation around her. The door opened. A young woman walked in, looking soaking wet and terrified. She was clearly out of town. Her car broke down outside. She looked around nervously, expecting hostility. "Welcome to the Gavel, sugar," Jenny called out from the counter, her smile bright and genuine. "Sit anywhere you like. We'll get you dried off." Beatrice watched the young woman relax. She saw the tension leave her shoulders. She saw her realize that she was safe here. That was the victory. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, in the Federal Correctional Institution at Pollock, prisoner 49201 sat on the edge of his bunk. Clint Rockwell had aged 20 years in 12 months. His hair was gone. His gut was gone, replaced by the gaunt hollowness of stress and bad food. He was no longer in solitary, but he was a pariah. Ex-cops in general population didn't last long, so he kept his head down. He swept floors. He didn't speak. He didn't make eye contact. He had become exactly what he used to despise, a nobody. A ghost. He had lost his family. His wife, disgusted by the revelations of his secret life and the shame he brought on them, had divorced him and moved to Oregon. His children didn't write. The only mail he received was from his lawyer, updating him on his appeals, which were systematically denied. One afternoon, during mail call, the guard tossed a single envelope onto his bunk. It had no return address, just a postmark from Eastwood. Rockwell's hands trembled as he picked it up. He hadn't heard from anyone in Eastwood since the sentencing. He tore it open. Inside was a photograph. It was a professional shot of the interior of the gavel. The place was glowing with warmth. The tables were packed with a diverse crowd, black, white, young, old, eating and laughing together. In the center of the frame, sitting in booth 4, was Beatrice Washington. She was looking directly at the camera. She wasn't smiling in a mocking way. Her expression was serene, regal, and utterly unbothered. She held a ceramic mug in her hand, raised slightly in a toast. On the back of the photo, in elegant cursive handwriting, were 3 sentences. "I sit in my seat every Tuesday. No one tells me to move. Enjoy your coffee, Mr. Rockwell." Rockwell stared at the photo. His throat tightened. A tear, hot and bitter, leaked from his eye. He remembered the feeling of power he used to have when he walked into that diner. He remembered how good it felt to make people afraid. And now, looking at the woman he tried to break, he realized the crushing truth of his existence. He was locked in a cage, surrounded by concrete and razor wire, while the woman he poured coffee on was the queen of the town he used to think he owned. He crumpled the photo, intending to throw it away. But he stopped. He smoothed it out again. It was the only color in his gray world. He taped it to the wall of his cell, right above his metal sink. He would look at it every day for the next 24 years. A daily reminder of the day he poured the coffee. A daily reminder that in the end, the quiet woman didn't just survive, she won. Back in Eastwood, the sun broke through the clouds. Beatrice closed her book. She finished her tea. She left a generous tip for the waitress, grabbed her cane, and walked out to her car. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a young rookie police officer was walking the beat. He saw her and stopped. He tipped his cap. "Good afternoon, Ms. Washington," he said respectfully. Beatrice smiled. "Good afternoon, officer. Stay safe out there." "Yes, ma'am. We'll do our best." She got into her car, a brand-new sedan with heated seats, and drove home. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She didn't need to. The past was behind her, buried under the weight of her son's gavel and her own indomitable spirit. She was Beatrice Washington, and she had moved the world without leaving her seat. And that is how the hunter became the hunted. Officer Rockwell thought he could crush a quiet woman because she looked weak. He made the fatal mistake of judging a book by its cover, and he forgot that some books are written by the people who write the laws. Beatrice Washington didn't just get revenge, she redefined justice for an entire town. She proved that true power isn't about a badge, a gun, or a loud voice. It's about dignity. It's about the strength to sit still when the world tells you to move and the courage to stand up when it matters most. Rockwell poured the coffee, but Beatrice served the karma, ice cold and straight to the heart. If this story fired you up, hit that like button and smash subscribe. Share this video if you believe that karma always collects its debt. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Beatrice? See you in the next video.